Here's something that's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. I know someone making $150,000 a year who had a panic attack last month because their car needed a above $200 repair. Not because they couldn't technically afford it, but because they literally didn't have $1,100 available without juggling bills, moving money around, and stressing about what else might break before their next paycheck. Meanwhile, I know someone making $52,000 who has $40,000 in savings and sleeps like a baby every night. So what's going on here? How is it possible that someone making 3 times the median household income is living with the same financial anxiety as someone making $35,000? My name is Drew, and I've spent way too much time analyzing why some high earners build massive wealth while others who make the exact same income are somehow always broke. If you've ever looked at your salary and wondered where all the money goes, or if you're making good money but still feel financially stressed, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up, because what I'm about to break down might explain your entire financial life. Let's start with the uncomfortable truth. Making $150,000 a year doesn't make you rich. It makes you high income, and those are two completely different things. Rich means you have wealth, assets, options, and freedom. High income just means money flows through your bank account quickly. Whether any of it actually stays there is a completely different question. The average person making $150,000 takes home around $105,000 after federal and state taxes, depending on where they live. That's about $8,150 a month hitting their account. Now, to most people making $50,000 or $60,000, that sounds like an absolutely absurd amount of money. Like, what could you possibly spend $8,950 a month on and still be broke? But here's where it gets interesting, and by interesting, I mean psychologically twisted in ways that trap people in financial stress despite making excellent money. The first thing that happens when you start making good money is something economists call lifestyle inflation, but that term doesn't capture how insidious this actually is. It's not just that your expenses go up, it's that your entire perception of what's normal completely rewires itself. When you were making $45,000, you thought twice about spending $15 on lunch. Now that you're making $150,000, you don't even register spending $25 on lunch because it's just $25 and you deserve it after working hard all morning. But here's the math that nobody does in the moment. $25 for lunch, 5 days a week, is $125 a week. That's $6,500 a year, just on lunch for one person. Now add in the $7 coffee you grab every morning, the $80 you spend on dinner twice a week because you're too tired to cook, the $200 a month on drinks with coworkers, and suddenly you're spending $15,000 to $20,000 a year just on food outside your home. And you're not even trying to be extravagant, you're just living like someone who makes $150,000. I have a friend, let's call her Sarah, who makes about $145,000 as a marketing director. Sarah lives in a beautiful apartment in a nice neighborhood, drives a BMW that she leases, wears designer clothes, takes amazing vacations, and is constantly stressed about money. Like, genuinely anxious. She once told me she feels like she's one bad month away from everything falling apart, which is insane because she makes more money than 90% of American households. So I asked her to walk me through her monthly expenses, just the big fixed stuff. Rent in a trendy neighborhood, $3,200. Car lease payment, $680. Car insurance, because BMW, $220. Student loans, $850. That's $4,150. And we haven't even gotten to groceries, utilities, her gym membership, her phone, or any of the subscription services. We're already at more than half her take-home pay, and she hasn't eaten a single meal or turned on a light. But here's what really got me. I asked her why she needed a $3,200 apartment when she could get something perfectly nice for $2,000. Her answer was fascinating. I can't live in a worse apartment than my coworkers. What would they think? Think about that. She's spending an extra $14,400 a year, money that could completely change her financial life, because she's worried about what her coworkers might think about her apartment. That's not a financial problem, that's a psychological prison. The car situation is even more ridiculous when you break it down. The BMW lease is $680 a month, so that's $8,160 a year. But that's just the lease payment. Add in insurance, gas, maintenance, and parking, and she's probably spending close to $12,000 a year on a car she doesn't even own. She could buy a reliable used car for $15,000 cash, drive it for 5 years, and save herself probably $40,000 over that time period. But she won't, because in her mind, someone making $150,000 drives a BMW, not a Honda Civic. This is where the psychology gets really twisted. When you make good money, you start believing you deserve certain things. And I'm not saying you don't deserve nice things, but there's a difference between deserving something and being able to afford it while still building wealth. The person making $150,000 who drives a leased BMW and lives in an expensive apartment might look successful, but they're often more financially stressed than the person making $70,000 who drives a paid-off Toyota and lives in a modest place. The really dangerous part about this trap is that it's socially reinforced. When you make $150,000, you're probably working with other people who make similar money. You're all eating lunch at the same places, talking about the same TV shows on the same streaming platforms, maybe living in the same neighborhoods. Nobody wants to be the person who suggests the cheap lunch spot or admits they're trying to save money. So everyone keeps spending, and everyone assumes everyone else can afford it. And nobody wants to be the first person to break the illusion. I call this the high-income peer pressure spiral, and it's absolutely brutal. You make more money, which puts you around people who spend more money, which pressures you to spend more money to fit in, which leaves you with no money despite making a lot of money. It's like being trapped on a treadmill that gets faster the longer you run. Let's talk about the psychology of just spending. When you make $45,000, spending $500 feels significant. It's more than 1% of your annual income. You think about it carefully, but when you make $150,000, spending $500 barely registers. It's only 1/3 of 1% of your income. It feels like nothing. So you say yes to the $400 dinner, the $600 concert tickets, the $500 impulse purchase, and none of them individually feel like a big deal. But when you do that 10 times a month, you've blown through $5,000 without ever making a single decision that felt extravagant. This is why high earners can genuinely have no idea where their money goes. They're not buying yachts or taking private jets. They're making dozens of small to medium purchases that individually seem reasonable, but collectively are absolutely devastating to their ability to build wealth. It's financial death by 1,000 paper cuts, except each paper cut is $200 and you don't even feel them happening. The fixed expense trap is another huge piece of this puzzle. When you're making $150,000, it's easy to justify taking on big fixed expenses because your income can technically cover them. The $3,500 mortgage payment, the $800 car payment, the $400 a month private school for the kids, the $200 gym membership, the 70 different subscriptions to things you barely use. Individually, each one seems justified. I need somewhere to live. I need a car. I want my kids to have good education. I need to stay healthy. I need entertainment. But here's the brutal reality. Fixed expenses are financial quicksand. Every dollar you commit to fixed monthly expenses is a dollar you can't save, can't invest, and can't use when opportunities or emergencies arise. And once you've committed to them, they're incredibly hard to cut. You can't just move to a cheaper apartment mid-lease. You can't return the car you financed. You definitely can't pull your kids out of private school mid-year without feeling like a terrible parent. I watched this happen to a couple I know. Both high earners, combined household income around $280,000. They bought a beautiful house with a $5,000 monthly mortgage payment because we can afford it on our income. Then they had kids and needed daycare, another $12,500 a month. Then they needed two reliable cars for their commutes, $400 a month in car payments. And then they wanted their kids in good activities, another $800 a month. Before they even got to groceries, utilities, or anything else, they'd committed $9,700 of their monthly income to fixed expenses. They're making great money and living more stressed than when they made $100,000 combined because they've locked themselves into expenses they can't easily escape. Here's something else that happens at higher income levels. The definition of emergency starts to inflate. When you were making $50,000, an emergency was your car breaking down or a medical bill. When you make $150,000, emergencies suddenly include your iPhone breaking, needing to replace your laptop, your expensive handbag getting damaged, or deciding you desperately need new furniture because what you have is embarrassing. The goalposts for what constitutes a necessary expense keep moving, and suddenly you're using your emergency fund for things that aren't actually emergencies. The vacation situation is particularly insane at this income level. People making $150,000 often feel like they should be taking the kinds of vacations that Instagram influencers post about. The $5,000 trip to Europe, the all-inclusive resort in the Caribbean, the ski trip to Colorado. And look, there's nothing wrong with taking nice vacations. But when you're spending $10,000 to $15,000 a year on travel while claiming you can't afford to max out your retirement accounts, you're not making financial decisions, you're making ego decisions. I know someone who makes $160,000 and took out a loan to pay for a $7,000 vacation to Bali. A loan for a vacation. When I pointed out how insane that was, his response was, "But all my friends go on trips like this. I can't just stay home while everyone else is traveling." That's the peer pressure spiral in its purest form. He went into debt to maintain an image, and now he's stressed about money despite having a six-figure income. The children expense multiplier is another trap that catches high earners off guard. When you make good money and have kids, you start believing you need to give them the best of everything. The best schools, the best activities, the best clothes, the best toys, the best birthday parties. And in your social circle of other high earners, everyone is doing the same thing, so it feels normal. But you're spending $2,000 a month on your kids' activities, education, and lifestyle when you could achieve 90% of the same developmental benefits for $400 a month. I'm not saying you shouldn't invest in your kids, but there's a difference between investing in their development and trying to buy their success or impress other parents. The kid doesn't care if they're wearing designer clothes to preschool. That's for you and your ego. The kid would be just as happy learning soccer in a rec league as in an elite travel club that costs 5 times as much. But parents making $150,000 convinced themselves they'd be failing their children if they didn't provide these expensive options. Let's talk about the housing trap specifically, because this is where I see high earners absolutely destroy their financial futures. You make $150,000, so naturally you want to live in a nice neighborhood. But nice neighborhoods in most cities mean $600,000 to $800,000 starter homes. So you stretch to buy a $750,000 house because the bank approved you for it and all your coworkers live in similar houses. Your mortgage payment is $4,500 a month, and suddenly more than half your take-home pay is going to housing. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities, and furniture for all that space add another $1,500 to $2,000 a month. Now you're spending $6,000 to $6,500 a month on housing, which is $78,000 a year. On one house. That's more than the median household income in America. You're spending more on housing than most families earn in total, and you convinced yourself this was reasonable because real estate is an investment, and you need space for your family, and everyone else in your income bracket lives this way. But here's the truth. That house is not an investment if it's preventing you from actually investing. If the choice is between living in a $750,000 house with no savings or living in a $450,000 house while maxing out your retirement accounts and building wealth, the smaller house makes you richer every single time. But that requires you to be okay with having less house than your peers, and that's where most high earners can't pull the trigger. The really insidious part about all of this is the golden handcuffs effect. The more you make, the more expensive your life becomes, and the more trapped you are. Changing jobs becomes scary because what if the new job doesn't work out? Starting a business becomes impossible because you can't afford a pay cut. Moving to a lower cost of living area becomes unthinkable because you'd have to downgrade your lifestyle. You're making $150,000 and somehow have less freedom than when you made $60,000 because you've built a life that requires $150,000 to sustain. I watched someone turn down a dream job opportunity that would have been amazing for his career because it came with a $20,000 pay cut and he couldn't afford to make less money. This guy was making $155,000, so dropping to $135,000 would still leave him in the top 10% of earners. But he'd structured his life so tightly around his current income that a 13% pay cut felt impossible. He was a financial prisoner making six figures. The retirement situation is especially maddening. Someone making $150,000 should be able to max out their 401k, $23,000 a year, max out a Roth IRA, $7,000, and still have plenty left over for living expenses and additional investing. But most people at this income level contribute maybe $10,000 to $15,000 to retirement and think they're doing great. They're not. They're dramatically undersaving relative to their income and their future needs. Here's the math that should terrify high earners. If you want to maintain a $150,000 lifestyle in retirement, you need about $3.75 million saved, assuming a 4% withdrawal rate. If you're 35 and want to retire at 65, that means you need to be saving and investing at least $50,000 a year to hit that goal. But most people making $150,000 are saving maybe $20,000 if they're being aggressive. Which means they're going to hit retirement age and realize they can't afford to stop working because they spent 30 years maintaining an expensive lifestyle instead of building wealth. The comparison game is absolutely toxic at this income level. You're not comparing yourself to people making median incomes anymore. You're comparing yourself to people making $250,000, $500,000, or more. You follow people on social media who seem to have infinite money. You see their houses, cars, vacations, and lifestyle, and you feel poor despite making $150,000. So you try to keep up, and you spend money trying to project an image of wealth while actually building zero wealth. What makes this especially frustrating is that making $150,000 gives you an enormous advantage in building wealth if you actually use it properly. You could live comfortably on $80,000 to $90,000, save and invest $40,000 to $50,000 a year, and build serious wealth over time. In 20 years, with compound growth, you could have well over $1 million and actual financial freedom. But instead, most people at this income level spend every dollar they make, build no wealth, and stay trapped on the high-income treadmill forever. The cognitive dissonance is real too. People making $150,000 genuinely feel like they're being responsible with money. They're not buying crazy luxury items. They're not gambling or making obviously stupid financial decisions. They're just living a lifestyle that matches their income. But matching your lifestyle to your income is exactly how you stay broke forever, regardless of how much you make. I had a conversation with someone making $165,000 who was complaining about being unable to save money. I asked him to estimate his annual spending on some categories: restaurants and bars, $18,000; car expenses, including the lease, $14,000; vacations, $12,000; designer clothes and accessories, $8,000. We weren't even done with the list, and we were at $52,000 on things he could dramatically cut if he wanted to. But in his mind, all of that spending was normal for someone at his income level. This is the lie that traps high earners. The idea that there's a normal way to spend money at your income level. There isn't. The person making $150,000 who retires with $5 million and the person making $150,000 who retires with $200,000 earned the same money. The only difference was their behavior. One person treated their high income as an opportunity to build wealth. The other treated it as permission to spend. The tax situation makes this even more brutal. When you make $150,000, you're losing about 30% to taxes, so you're working from January through mid-April just to pay the government. Then you're working most of the rest of the year to pay for a lifestyle you convinced yourself you needed. By the time you get to money, you're actually saving and investing for your future. You're lucky if it's 10% of your income. You're giving the government 3 times as much as you're giving your future self. Here's what really gets me. The people making $150,000 and living paycheck to paycheck often look down on people making less money and assume those people just need to earn more. They don't understand that income isn't the problem, behavior is. I know people making $60,000 who are building more wealth than people making $150,000 because they understand the difference between high income and actual wealth building. The solution to this trap isn't complicated, but it is uncomfortable. You have to be willing to live below your means, regardless of what your peers are doing. You have to recognize that a high income is an opportunity, not an obligation to spend. You have to get comfortable driving a less expensive car, living in a smaller house, taking cheaper vacations, and generally having a lifestyle that looks less impressive than what your income could theoretically support. But here's what nobody tells you. The freedom that comes from making $150,000 and living like you make $90,000 is better than any luxury purchase you could ever make. When you have $60,000 a year to save and invest, you build wealth so fast that within a decade you have real options. You can retire early if you want. You can start a business. You can take a lower-paying job you actually enjoy. You can weather any financial storm without stress. That's what wealth actually is. It's options and freedom. Making $150,000 and living paycheck to paycheck is a choice. It might not feel like a choice because of social pressure, lifestyle expectations, and peer comparisons. But it is. Every dollar you spend is a choice between looking wealthy now and being wealthy later. And the people who figure this out early are the ones who end up with actual wealth, while everyone else is still trapped in the cycle of making great money and having nothing to show for it except expensive stuff and constant financial stress.